Hey guys, welcome back to Coliseum Forum. This week I am joined by legendary artist Jim Balent. Jim is known for Catwoman. You've drawn Lobo. Uh, you've drawn everybody over at DC at this point in some way, shape, or form, right?
Pretty much. Not everyone, but I'm not a legendary artist.
Not a legendary artist. Okay, so not
I
legendary
just
artist
I
Jim
just
Balent.
draw legend. Or I drew and still draw legendary characters. So
Fair.
I'm not a legendary artist.
And you obviously you have your own book, Tarot, which is awesome. There it is, Broadsword Comics.
That's
So
right.
let's that's kind of the good entry point for us. Um, what was your first introduction to comic books?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we're going way back to when I'm 5 years old when my parents would. Well, actually, my parents and my uncle would bring home comic books either found at the supermarket, or my uncle used to be a delivery driver in New York City. And back then, they would have the comic books, and if they didn't sell, they'd cut off the tops
Right.
and return them. And sometimes I would see him maybe once or twice a year. He'd come over and give us a stack of comic books. So, with watching Spider-Man on TV, watching, Adam West's Batman on TV, and then having the comic books of DC Batman and, Marvel Spider-Man, I was hooked right away when I was 5 years old.
And then so from there, your uncle brings you these comics, your mom brings you these comics. When is the first time you're like, I think I could probably draw some of these characters?
That is a very good question. Like, not many people ask that. So basically, the story is, and it's the truth, is we didn't have much extra money to buy comics. So what would happen is I would read the Spider-Man or the Batman, and then what would happen is there's always a cliffhanger at the end.
Right.
So I didn't get the next issue, so I would go to my room or just get some paper and draw the next, what I would think the next scene would be, or the next issue.
Right.
So right from there, I was just sort of like letting the fantasy go. Like, if the Joker has the Batman, tied up, I would draw the result of it.
Right. The big escape or whatever came next.
Right.
Right.
And that started with me coming up with my own characters at an early age. And so that's, what started this whole career, I believe.
So at what point were you like, yeah, I think I can do this. I think I can make this a job. Like this is what I want to do.
Well, it's funny because, for the longest time, although I loved comic books, it wasn't until my senior year in high school where it sort of dawns on you, where you have to sort of like really think, what are you going to do for your life? But, at the age of 5, I already had like careers, mapped out. But it wasn't until the senior year where you start thinking like, what am I going to do? And I wanted to be a comic book artist. And lucky for me, there was the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Art in Dover, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's so cool. I'll apply there. And, we went there, my father and I, we went there on, I forget, it was probably in the summer maybe. Showed him my portfolio and met Joe. And Joe was one of my teachers my first year. And that started. It was the Joe Kubert School. That was sort of like the first formal training
Right.
to become an artist.
So then how do you go from the Joe Kubert School, which if anybody's been a long time comic book reader, they all remember the ads in the back of the comics. I think they still pop up from time to time. How do you go from there to, drawing Catwoman?
Sure. I'll do it really briefly. Joe Kubert School. My first published work was in the back of Sergeant Rock Comics, which I wrote and drew. Joe approved it. That was my first published work before I graduated. After I graduated, I hooked up with a great inker named Kim DeMulder. He's now a teacher at the Joe Kubert School. He was inking a lot of Marvel projects, the She-Hulk graphic novel, I think West Coast Avengers. But I was sort of his background inker. And at the time, you didn't get credit to be someone's like, background inker or
Right.
apprentice. It was just, Kim DeMulder. And so what I did and was sort of allowed to do was I would hide JB like in the background of all the sort of comic book characters or comic pages.
Right.
So sometimes if you're picking up an old issue, you might see like JB camera like in a window.
Right.
So that Jim Balent.
Right.
And
Right.
there's also a little famous panel from the She-Hulk graphic novel where John Byrne did these incredible you know control panels, and he did these like checkerboards on these control panels, and like Reed Richards is sitting there. So on the sort of grid, I blackened in some of those little squares, and you can see a JB in that.
That's
So
awesome.
if I find it, I'll send it to you guys.
No, that'd be awesome. We'd love to see that.
Prove I did it.
No.
All right. So
Absolutely.
then from there became, I've always wanted to just be a penciler and to create my own stuff.
Right.
So I would go into, Marvel every day with the pages that I finished with Kim DeMolder, hand them off. He met the editors, and then I would show them, hey, this is what I really do,
Right.
or I do this on the side. So you sort of keep improving, and the editors give you, tips on what to do.
Right.
And this was the time where you could call up an editor and just say, "Oh, Jim, come on in. We'd love to see your work."
Right.
And I would go in, and the best thing was, even if they said, not today, kid, maybe next time, they still gave you like a Spider-Man visitor sticker. So that was like the coolest thing, to walk into Marvel and get like a Spider-Man, visitor sticker.
Right.
And then another sort of geeky thing to do was, I'm a kid from a farm town in New Village, New Jersey, and so now I'm going into New York City, the big city.
Yeah.
That's where Spider-Man lives. That's where Kiss, my favorite group,
Right.
grew up and played, and that's where what I always thought, maybe Batman was there. And I remember watching the Batman film where Adam West and Burt Ward would run down the street. And so every time I went into the city to drop off my pages, I would sort of like make sure I ran down a block or two, because I was like imagining I was like Adam West as Batman running down the streets.
Right.
So I had a blast. But what happened was eventually some of the editors from Marvel moved over to DC. So
Okay.
then the work started shifting to DC, and I went over there dropping off some samples. And then I started getting some backup stories, like in a Green Lantern quarterly. Right. And then from there, what happened was I was offered an annual. It was a Batman annual, which like blew my mind, or I think detective. And it was Chuck Dixon, a great writer. He was writing it. And as I was drawing the Batman annual, or the detective annual, I got a call from Denny O'Neil saying, "We're starting Catwoman #1. Would you like to be on it?" And this was over the phone.
Right.
So like, before there was video, you'd probably be seeing me going like,
Right,
of course. Right. But of course on the phone, you're like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it sounds cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
But it was fantastic because I'm a huge Julie Newmar fan.
Right.
And they said, okay, we also want you to, redesign the costume. Just, there's no rules. The only rule is just don't make it look like Michelle Pfeiffer, because there's some sort of contracts that, all that look goes over to, the WB, movies. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. I had no thoughts about making it look like Michelle Pfeiffer. I had my own ideas.
Right.
And basically with that, I looked at the development of the costume. I looked at what came before me, because I wanted the evolution of the Catwoman costume to look like it fit in. So I saw she was wearing purple, and I liked that. I didn't really like the green cape,
right?
But I wanted her to be more, Catwoman,
right?
And I focused on those two words, and I also focused on her silhouette, because I knew there was a lot of times I wanted to draw her in just a silhouette form, and I wanted people to go, "That's Catwoman,"
right?
So even when she just has that, that hourglass look and the ears, I thought, wow, that's great. And I definitely wanted her long hair back,
right?
So I guess that's sort of the short, long answer to your question.
No, that's awesome. In fact, that print you showed me before the interview, that's the costume you ended up coming up with, right?
Yes, actually, this one. Okay, actually, this is the actual pinup that's in the latest, I think, Catwoman 80th
The anniversary,
anniversary.
yeah, it is.
Right. So DC Comics contacted me, and you know, if if my schedule of working with Tarot, because it's a bi-monthly book,
Right.
there's sort of like little gaps that I could fill in, like pet projects,
Sure.
which this was definitely one of them. I definitely say yes to this. So this was the actual. Well, it's actually 11 by 17 blown up, but I do draw with pen and pencil still, and inks with a brush.
Oh,
And
wow.
I do all the coloring on Photoshop. So I hate calling it old school, because to me it's like, hey, this is what I do,
Right.
and I love doing that. Now, what's going back to this, if you don't mind me jumping?
No, go for it.
When DC Comics asked me to do the Catwoman pinup,
Yeah.
I gave them 3 designs, and this was obviously one of them.
Right.
The other one was actually this one that I recreated on tan paper.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, this one is sort of like, the story behind this was sort of, Batman and Catwoman. I wanted to show that sort of secret relationship between them, where he's sort of like still protecting her from the rain, and they're still like, this sort of partners,
Right.
Even though supposedly they're on different sides of the coin.
Right. No, that's awesome. Very cool. And so, and I mean, your Catwoman run went for 6 years, right? From like 93 to 99?
Yeah, 7 years.
7 years.
Count
Sorry. I'm bad at
7
math.
years. Because, you start on a certain day.
Right.
But yeah, and then on top of that, it was 77 issues, plus Catwoman annuals,
Right.
plus the Dark Claw.
Right. Dark Claw. Yep.
Plus the Lobo specials, which you talked about.
Yep.
And I've even sometimes worked on, I think, a Batman issue here and there if they needed somebody to fill in.
Right.
So yeah, it's not just 77 issues of Catwoman; it's 77 plus
all these other projects as well. Right.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of sold you short during the intro. I called you a legendary artist, even though you said you're not a legendary artist. But you've done almost every job in the comics industry. I mean, you write tarot, right? You've written comics, you've drawn comics, you've edited comics, you've inked, you published through Broadsword, right?
I own Broadsword, yes.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, is there like a job that you have in the comics industry? Like, I mean, have you worked at a comic book shop? That's the only other thing I can think of.
No, I've walked into those.
Yeah, fair enough. But I mean,
have friends who own them.
Fair.
Yes.
But I mean, you've done basically every job in the comics industry. Of all those hats that you wear, what do you think is your favorite? Is it still being an artist?
It's I like being me. I mean, that's
Fair.
sort of my answer, because one of the things, going to the Joe Kubert school, yes, he taught you how to ink, how to pencil, how to paint. One of my teachers was Greg Hildebrand.
Right.
Once again, a great teacher. They taught you these things, but I never thought of myself as just one,
right.
An inker or a penciler or a letter. I'm a storyteller, I
Sure.
guess. And I want to see everything in my head on paper.
Right.
So I don't have a favorite. I like when it's a finished product,
Right.
and that's fun. And then I have other ideas for the next.
What? That's a great answer. So you worked with some of the publishers for a while, and now you have Broadsword. Tarot's the big book from Broadsword. There are like a lot of magic themes and things like that. Is the arcane kind of where your interest lies, or is it just one of the things you're into?
Well, yeah, the reason sort of tarot came about is I'm a big Frank Thorne Red Sonja fan.
Sure.
And growing up with his comic books, I was just like, whoa, these are awesome. And I loved the way he drew the female form.
Sure.
I loved his storytelling. And, I was even able to talk to him on the phone a few times.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, he's really cool. Holly's a friend of his personally. So it was sort of how everything came together. It was really cool. So yeah, I had this sort of, Dungeons and Dragons in me. I love playing the Dungeon Master as
Right.
Dungeons and Dragons. And so this is all part of storytelling and sword and sorcery. And yeah, I had 3 to 4 ideas before I started Broadsword of what I should put forward.
Right.
And out of those four ideas, I chose Tarot, Witch of the Black Rose, because she had it was a female lead story,
Right.
which I always am attracted to. Sword and sorcery, which is great, and it was about witchcraft, and which is very fascinating to me.
Sure.
Uh, I know people who are witches, and so throughout the years, these stories kept building up in my head, and I actually started developing tarot back when I was in high school.
Oh wow.
So yeah, so like all this stuff comes together, and my stories and writings come together because I've met certain people. I met Billy now, so like who knows how you're going to influence me in my next story.
Okay.
So yeah, all this sort of comes together, and I always think of like tarot as sort of being entertaining and education at the same time, because
Right.
there are certain rules to follow with her, but mostly it's just telling a good adventure story.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's cool to hear. I always love hearing the genesis of like, especially like with like creator owned stuff, how they come up with those ideas, and kind of hearing I see it now from Red Sonja to tarot. That makes sense to me. So you mentioned that you have some friends that are witches and things like that. Do you ever consult with them like, hey, I think this might happen. What do you think of this?
I've never sort of called them up as a like I'm thinking about doing this. It's mostly either the stories come about the way things I've experienced them, or things
Right.
that happened in my life, or things that have happened in my friend's life,
Sure.
and I think, wow, that's a cool idea, and then let me twist that so it doesn't sound preachy, and I can make an adventure story. What I've left out was the way I put myself through the Joe Kubert School of Art.
Right.
Was during the summer I worked as a gravedigger, so
Oh
I worked
wow.
in the cemetery, and that's why one of the characters in the book, his name is John Webb.
Right.
He's a cemetery worker, and
Right.
so he's definitely based off of me.
Right.
So I take everything that I can, and I funnel it in. So sometimes the stories are really serious,
Right.
and sometimes it's fun and,
Right.
and happy, because that's what life is.
Right. So you were just on the Catwoman 80th anniversary. You've got tarot. Do you have any other projects in the work?
Oh, well, right now I am currently running a Kickstarter, and it's for the Raven Hex,
Okay.
the #1 trade paperback. It just launched maybe about a week or so ago.
Okay.
It's already funded. Thank you for all your support out there, guys. So now we're at that sort of cool stage where, everyone who's familiar with Kickstarters, you
Right.
reach certain levels, and then you get to add like more freebie stuff
Right. Right.
to like all the people who like who supported you. And I love the idea of Kickstarter, because to me, I always view it as like, my favorite band out there is Kiss,
Right.
So like, wouldn't it be cool to like get items just from like Kiss, as opposed to going to the store and just buying the item?
Right.
That's how I view like Kickstarter. It's like, yeah, it's really cool that you could get the comic book in the comic shops, which I love doing that, to walk into a comic shop and seeing my book there.
Right. Right.
But there's also this other level and other sort of, fan inside me that know that, wow, I can get it directly from the artist, and I get like an alternate cover, or he'll send me this litho, so that's what the Kickstarter is all about right now.
So
yeah, check out the Kickstarter. It's on my Facebook page right now.
Do you know the link? Is it kickstarter.com/something or?
Anyone who goes to my Facebook page, just scroll down, you'll see the hot link
Okay.
right there. Yeah.
So we do have a question from somebody watching. Your book is called Tarot. This is from Andrea.
Hello, Andrea.
So your book is called Tarot. Have you ever used divining cards yourself?
I've studied them. I read about them, and I have dabbled in them. I cannot say that I'm proficient at it. There are people that I've known who are very remarkable at it. So I will, when people come up to me and they ask me, can you give me a reading, or do I read cards on a regular basis? Honestly, I'm going to say no, but I know more about that than, say, someone who's not writing about tarot. So yeah, I also picked a subject matter that I'm familiar with.
Right.
Like I mentioned, like graveyards and people I've met, witches, and
Sure.
also with the tarot deck. Who isn't fascinated by the tarot deck, especially of the artwork itself?
Right.
So, but yeah, to answer your question, I would say no. I'm not a professional reader.
Fair enough. And then actually, our mutual friend Moshi, you had mentioned Kiss just a little bit ago. He said you've done some work for Kiss, right?
Yes, actually, I was really lucky to work with Gene Simmons. He puts out his own comic book called The Dominatrix. And once backstage, when I met him during one of those, meet and greets, he knew me from the comic book world because he's a big comic book fan. He knew I drew Catwoman, and he said, "Hey, I'm looking for a cover artist for my Dominatrix book. Would you be interested?" And it's one of those moments where you just go, "Yeah!" And inside your head, you just scream, and
Right.
you just go, "Yeah, of course." So the guy is incredible to work with, Gene. We emailed back and forth when I was working on the two covers. I think there was one cover I did for the regular issue, and then I did one for the graphic novel. So that was cool. And then later on, I worked on his Kiss comic book, or I've done several covers for them. I did a few, I think it's for Jetpack Comics, where I did exclusive covers just for that store.
Right.
So once again, Gene approved all the artwork. So it's always great, like seeing the guys on tour. I saw them before the whole pandemic went
Sure.
down. So I saw their end of the road tour, and met them backstage. And it's always great to see Paul and Gene and talk to them. So yeah, it was a really cool. It's one of those things where it's like, as a kid, you remember seeing the Kiss Marvel comic book,
Right.
and you just get like, oh my God, I want to draw that someday. And then, thanks to, my supporters and readers out there, they gave me the life right now. The reason you guys are interviewing me is because of those guys, those readers out there who supported me and my art this whole time. So like, I'm really nothing. It's just, it's the readers and the support. So yeah, it was great working with Gene, and I'm sure there's going to be more. And well, speaking of rock stars, the co-founder of Iced Earth, John Schaefer, just wrote me a few months ago, and he asked me to illustrate the cover to his book.
Oh wow.
Wicked, yeah, of Wicked lyrics.
Okay.
And actually, his Kickstarter is happening right now too. So go to his Iced Earth Facebook page, and you'll see the hot link, and you'll see he put my art on his T-shirts. He put my art on his book cover. So I mean, my God, this is like, it was a huge honor. So of course, I said yes to that.
So okay, I know you don't like the tag legendary, but you've done a lot. Of all the things in your portfolio right now, what would you say you're the most proud of?
I don't have a proud moment. There's times where like I have all of my original Catwoman covers. I don't sell my published art.
Right.
I never did.
Right.
Neither did Frank Thorne.
Sure.
And so it just, to me, they're like snapshots, like photo albums of like, oh, I remember when I did this. So every now and then I'll see them in a portfolio, and I don't know if I'm proud of that. It just brings back good memories of like, wow,
Right.
At the time you have deadlines, and you got, editors to sort of, have approvals from. So like all this stuff is happening. So now looking back at it, you kind of go, wow, that's really cool. I'm glad I was able to do that.
Right.
So I'm proud. I hate to use the word proud, but yeah, I'm proud that, for the past 20 years, Tarot Witch of the Black Rose has met all the deadlines.
Right.
It's a bi-monthly book. It's on issue 121. And I think 122 just came out now in the stores. And that takes a lot of work. Holly and I, we work a lot. Marvel and DC can't say they've hit all their deadlines in 20 years.
Right.
But Broadsword Comics can. So I'm proud of that because we work hard. And I literally work from like 10 to 12 hours every day. So you say I've done a lot, and I guess because I sit and I draw a lot. So that's what happens.
So now you just said you work 10 to 12 hours a day. When you sit down, so like you said, 122 just hit the shelves recently. we've got 123 coming out in a month and a half at this point, right? Um,
Correct.
what's the timeline? So like, do you plot and storyboard first, or do you start doing pages right away? Like, what's your process like?
Good question. The way I work is I already have the concept in my head, and you have to 3 months ahead because you have to do the ad solicitation. So you have that idea in your head, and then when it comes to plotting out an issue, and this is how I worked on Catwoman or Batman or even the Tarot book,
Right,
is I lay out my pages in thumbnail form, about like this big. I take an 11 by 17, and I just draw like 10 or 5, 5, and then 5, 5. So I get 22 pages.
right,
And then I start thumbnail my story to see if it flows right. And then I'll make notes. If I have dialogue that comes to my head, I'll have, Tarot say something, and I'll write it down in the margins. So once I have that, then I go directly to pencils. I don't. I actually draw the pencils onto an 11 by 17 piece of paper.
okay,
So I work out all my problems, and then from there, I lightbox that onto a clean Bristol. So technically, I'm sort of drawing the same drawing 3 times. You're doing a rough, you're
right.
doing the pencils, and then eventually, like I said, I hand ink things. So 3 times. So in
So
a long day, I hopefully can do 1 page a day,
so you
depending on what I'm drawing.
and we're an average comics were 22 pages, so it's 22 days just for one book to be drawn.
Right. It sounds like that, but it really does take 2 months because you're talking about you're doing several different covers.
Right.
You're doing also looking up reference sometimes
Sure.
for your 22 pages, and then just doing a page a day is a heavy schedule.
Oh, for sure.
So yeah, if you kind of sometimes it's almost like a marathon runner. You could start off. It might start off slow, where you can do maybe a page every 2 days,
Right.
and then all of a sudden you get into this groove where you're like, okay, I'm up at 7 o'clock drawing, and then by 7 o'clock at night I'm done, and I have 1 page finished.
Now, when we say a page finished, I mean this is just pencils though at this point, right?
No, I'm talking about pencils and inks.
Oh, okay. So you do pencils, inks. When do you do color? After everything's done, or
Correct. Well, I do. Holly does all the interior colors
right?
of the comic book, but I do all the coloring on the covers.
Okay.
So once again, you have, let's say, 1 day of pencils and inks for a cover,
Right.
but then it might take me 2 to 3 days to color that cover.
Right.
Like for the Catwoman drawing, it took me 2 to 3 days to sort of color this.
Right.
And then penciling it took me a day, and then you have to wait for approval, and then you
Right.
do the inks for the next day. So yeah, it does. You believe it? Yeah, you go, oh, 22 days. Oh, that's good. So you have a month off. No, it's never like that.
Right. So when did you decide, like, okay, I've worked for DC, I've worked around the industry, I'm kind of going to strike out on my own, because I mean that could be a kind of a scary thing.
Oh, it is. And the day that happened was, it takes a lot of time
Right.
and a lot of energy, but also takes a lot of money to put out a good comic book. I wanted the comic book to be as equal to DC or Marvel, or not better, with paper and printing qualities.
Right.
So, I wanted to be in color, and that's what I did. So those first 4 issues was a self-contained story.
Right.
And all the so-called experts in the field that I talked to,
Right.
everybody told me, your issue is not going to get past issue 3. And I was just like, oh my God, Catwoman's done. DC, I left DC, and I'm spending all this money doing my own stuff because that's kind of what I want to do.
Right.
And now everyone who's the experts are saying, Jim, you're not going to get any money. You'll be gone after issue 3. Well, 20 years later,
122
I'm
issues,
still here
yeah.
publishing and doing a very good living. So it's a lot more work, but I've always been a workaholic. Holly's always been a workaholic, and we've been going on. But yeah, that first step, it's that sort of scene from Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, where he's at that edge of the cliff, and you have to take that leap. into nothingness.
Right.
And you just sort of got to believe in yourself, and you take that step and like, oh my God, there's a foot. And then
Right.
that foothold is, the readers.
Right.
Those are the ones who've supported me and Indiana Jones all those years.
So now when you, I mean, you've mentioned your readers and things like that quite a few times. Obviously comics readers are the reasons that any of us are here, right? Do you do the con circuit, right? Do you go out and do signings and things like that?
Rarely.
Rarely.
Yeah, because of my schedule, I normally, the past year, the San Diego Comic Con has always been a staple since before I was on Catwoman.
Right.
So that has always been a staple, and I've seen that thing grow into the monster that it is now.
Right.
So Broadsword Comics has its own booth there. So every year we go to San Diego, and it used to be just San Diego for a long period of time, because I was still trying to make sure that Broadsword Comics, was on an even path.
Right.
And, what's different about my comic book company is that it's just me.
Right.
And Holly.
Right.
It's not like I could take a month off and say, Billy, you
Right.
want to draw tarot? And then I'll go. Because I realize the responsibility with having a readership is that they want to see my art. They want my story. So I make sure that, okay, I have to sacrifice, going to New York Con all the time or this. So what I do is every now and then I do allow certain Comic Cons to sort of, woo me away
Right,
from the
right.
debt. And I love traveling to Europe. So recently we've been traveling to Vienna Con. We traveled to Edinburgh. We traveled to London, Germany, and I also love doing like these really quick spot appearances in comic stores.
Right.
Right here in Pennsylvania, in Allentown, or at Counterplay up in Massachusetts, or like I said, even in Edinburgh, where there was a small comic book store, and I just wanted to say, hey, would you like me to drop in for like a few hours and sign?
Sure.
And they were delighted. So yeah, once again, I try not to do all the comics conventions,
Right.
because you just can't with the scheduling
Right.
that it takes to put out a comic book.
No, and that makes complete sense. Like you said, at some of the bigger publishers and stuff, they can just point and be like, Billy, that's your deadline. I'll be in New York, right? It would just be in you and Holly, and hearing your process, I can imagine that's having that kind of big hands-on approach, makes it a little bit more difficult to do those sort of things.
Right, and that also applies to when I was back on Catwoman, because Catwoman was a monthly book, so you have 22 pages to pencil in a month.
Right.
That's you had scripts, you had everything to sort of look up.
Yeah.
So even when I was on Catwoman, I rarely did appearances
Right.
at the Catwoman artist. So
well, also somebody in our chat right now just said that you and Holly are big fans of Orlando, specifically the parks. Is that true? You guys are big Disney Universal?
Yeah, a lot of people ask, when you're going on vacation, where do you go? And it's usually Universal Studios or Disney, because
Right.
we're both fans of both companies. What I really enjoy is, for the whole year, I'm sort of developing this fantasy world.
Right.
Now this is sort of like the reverse, where I get input from outside. Right. Now I get to go into these other fantasies.
Sure.
So, Holly's a huge Harry Potter fan. I'm a Potter fan, but I'm more of a fan of the park because of what they did.
Sure.
I'm a big fan of this immersion. I'm not a big fan of putting up a roller coaster and calling it Batman.
Right.
It's like, okay, last week it was Superman. Now it's Batman.
Right.
Why does it make a difference? But no, the parks are wonderful. And I've even signed comic books while on vacation in Hogsmeade, in the parks. And I say this to everyone. I sign for free. That's for one.
Okay.
So if you have a book and you see me on the street or wherever, I'll sign it, because you're the reason why I'm here. So there's times where I've met readers at Halloween Horror Nights, and I've signed their books.
Oh, that's
Uh,
cool.
yeah, and I've even signed books in front of or before going to a Kiss concert. So to me, that's just like, I love doing that stuff, but I don't like the heat so much
No,
down
fair
there.
enough.
Yeah,
It was
so I
it
don't
was
know how
100
you
degrees
guys deal
yesterday.
with it.
Lots of central air. That helps. Um, we do have a couple people in the chat that says next time you're in Orlando, you maybe should consider swinging by a Coliseum.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
Um, so you have your Kickstarter. You've gotten funded, but now you're adding some additional perks and stuff. What is your Kickstarter specifically for?
Well, it's for a 48-page trade paperback of Raven Hex alternate paths. Basically, the storyline is sort of like a what if or alternate worlds where people who know the tarot books
Right.
know that tarot was called upon to take up the sword to keep the balance between man and magic.
Right.
So she's sort of the level-headed, character, where Raven Hex is her darker older sister who has suffered a great tragedy and hasn't processed it yet because their father was killed, and Raven Hex is just consumed by hate and revenge. So I thought it'd be a really cool idea what if Raven Hex accepted the sword from the goddess? What would it be like if she was the sword maiden to the goddess and not Taro? So
Oh,
that's
wow.
what
Okay.
this 48-page book is about. There's lots of what's good about my book. It's a mature reader's book, so
Right.
it does have nudity in it. It does have blood in it,
Right.
and it has a mature storyline.
Sure.
And when I say mature reader, it doesn't mean age really.
Right.
Mature reader means your mentality. Are you mature
Right.
enough to read this book?
Right.
But yeah, it's a great adventure. And before, I think we were talking. Sometimes I call up my friends and I say, "Hey, can you pose like you're being eaten by a monster?" And then I'll take a pose. I'll take a snapshot of and then I'll send it to them. And my friends will take a photo of themselves doing that and send it back to me, and I'll draw them in the background. So that's always fun to do.
Listen, anytime you want to have me eaten by a monster, I definitely volunteer for that because that sounds absolutely awesome.
Thanks.
So so this is basically like it's almost like an Elseworld for the tarot universe, right? Is what
yeah, for people who like the Marvel or the DC universe, it's Elseworld, or it's a what if 48-page graphic novel.
Very cool. And so what was kind of the genesis for that idea? Like you said, I mean, she is kind of the flip side of the coin for the main character in the book, right? When did you have that aha moment where you were like, okay, let's see what it was like if she was the sword maiden?
Well, I've always had that moment.
Sure.
And what happens when I'm writing or drawing an issue, something will happen, or I'll remember something, or I'll just have this flash and I'll write down something that was inspiring. And a year ago or so, I wrote down, well, what if Raven Hex was the sword maiden? And I would add that to my list of things to
kind of explore,
to draw about.
Right.
And it just never came up. And then what was strange was I already had it planned to start this alternate timeline when, because I even ended a tarot timeline. And then what happened was, it was actually, I ended it in the year, the 20th anniversary issue of tarot.
Right.
And then the next issue was going to be like a Raven Hex alternate world. And that's when the pandemic happened. And so in a weird way, I just kind of used that to sort of go, okay, the world went sideways, so will tarot at the same time.
Right.
And that's, I launched the Raven Hex #1.
Well, that's awesome. We actually have that Kickstarter up in the chat right now. So if you guys are interested in that, you can take a look at that. Jim, we obviously know how much work you put into your product. It's been great speaking with you today. If you are in Orlando, we'd love to have you swing by and meet the crew next time you're in town. But Jim Balent, everybody.
Well, I just want to say, it was an honor for you guys to invite me on, and it's fantastic. Thank you so much.
No, absolutely. You one of my favorite guests so far. So, Jim, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.